All right. Our topic this morning is the state of the conservative movement. And John's comments about the conservative factions around the world is a wonderful framing for that. And today we are fortunate to have two brilliant observers and analysts of not only our movement, but of our entire culture. Please welcome Paul Kengor and Jeff Lord. Take this. Paul is a professor of political science at Grove City. He is the author of 20 books. He is a frequent guest on television, Fox News, Newsmax, and also EWTN and PragerU. Jeff Lord is a former journalist. He also worked, as John mentioned, as chief of staff with John Hines. He also was deeply involved in the Reagan-Bush 84 campaign as legislative aide to Drew Lewis and chief director of political affairs. In the administration of President George H.W. Bush, he was legislative aide to HUD Secretary Jack Kemp. He is now a contributing editor to the American Spectator and Newsmax TV, and he has a podcast with, I think you could say, almost a heaven-sent name, which is The Word of the Lord. Please welcome again Paul Kengor and Jeff Lord, and then I'll begin with some questions. Before we plunge into some of the issues and personalities involved today, I'd love to stay at that higher level that John established and look at the origins of the conservative movement and some of the principles involved, all the way from the development of the conservative mind through William F. Buckley to Paul Weyrich and Ed Feulner and Ronald Reagan, in addition to the principles of conservatism, which John articulated: small government, stress on liberty, strong national defense, traditional values, etc. There has always been a moral core that links all of those individual policy positions together. And we have heard some say that we are drifting from our moral core in the conservative movement today, that it is diminishing in centrality. And I'd appreciate your high-level observation of whether you think that is the case or not, and if it is the case, what we should do about it. Then we can start to talk about individual candidates, issues, policies, and so on. So I'll just begin with Jeff and go straight down the line.
Well, one of the first things I'd say is that there's one name missing from your list. And I know this because my parents in the day were very big supporters of Ohio Senator Robert Taft.
Granted, the list was not intended to be complete, but happy to add Robert Taft. Anyway, go on, Jeff.
And I have their Taft buttons still. And I think that's really when the conservative movement began. It began to some degree with the split between his father, William Howard Taft, President William Howard Taft, who was a protege of President Theodore Roosevelt, and then trouble along the way. And TR was quite the progressive and bull mooser and all of that kind of thing. And Taft was Mr. Conservative, and they split over that. And ever since then, I think the conservative movement has been up and running big time.
But what about the moral core that goes across that entire spectrum?
Well, I think that this comes out in issues like abortion, other issues. It's more social policy, than it is fiscal policy. And I think that is very much a strain within the Republican Party.
Do you see the moral core as central to the integrity of the conservative movement? And if so, are we in any troubling way drifting from that moral core?
I think it is always at the center of the Republican Party, a successful Republican Party. And I know I'm always sort of amused at the resistance to President Trump initially, because people felt that he was the last person on earth to be at the center of a moral code. But I think he has surprised a lot of people and really become quite conservative with the moral focus.
Fair enough. John?
I would tend to agree with that and point out that the moral code, belief in God, and a greater good are things that remain sacrosanct in the conservative movement. Now, there is always going to be dissent of some kind. I mentioned libertarianism. There are some on the libertarian side who take the pro-choice position on abortion. And it gets back to the idea of the freedom to do as you wish, even though there are those who say, as Ron Paul did, that the first liberty of all and the most important is life itself. And but I'd also say this: there are still some pro-choice Republicans, including some who were elected in Pennsylvania. It is very hard to find pro-life Democrats anymore, and no Democrat in the House of Representatives or the Senate, for example, calls him or herself pro-life anymore. So we see a tolerance for dissenting views with an understanding that the overall position is for the right to life. And that is not evident on the other side.
Thank you, John. Paul?
Well, it's good to be with you all again. This is the only time all year that I get up for a breakfast event for anything. And in fact, this chair is so comfortable I might fall asleep. Somebody bring me up a cup of coffee quickly. But no, great to be with you all. And as we're talking about this, I love that opening question. Ronald Reagan in 1977, speaking at CPAC, talked about how the conservative movement was made up of two halves: moral, social conservatives and economic conservatives. And that goes back to what John Gizzi talked about with fusionism and Frank Meyer. Frank Meyer was one of the original board members of National Review, he and William F. Buckley Jr., that Bill Buckley founded. And in fact, one of the foundational texts of the conservative movement, God and Man at Yale, by Buckley in 1952, argued that you needed to have both Christianity as well as you got faith and freedom both. One of the reasons our group at Grove City College is called the Institute for Faith and Freedom, right? You needed both halves. So in another foundational book in the movement, Colin mentioned The Conservative Mind. That was a book by Russell Kirk. And Kirk defined conservatism as representing an enduring moral order, right? An enduring moral order. So, morality, a moral core, is at the core of the conservative movement. And Kirk even objected to the idea of describing conservatism as an ideology, right? He said it's more an attitude, it's a way of thinking. Mark Levin says this a lot, right? He says, I'm a conservative, and because it's just the way that I see the world, right? It's my attitude, it's the way of processing the world. So a moral core is essential to conservatism. And I'll circle back to Ronald Reagan. I wanted to mention as well, I thought of this, John, while you were up there talking. Let's remember Mike Reagan. And we lost Mike a few months ago. And at the PLC, probably about 20 years ago, was the first time that I met you. And I interviewed Mike in the big ballroom. It wasn't here at Lohman, it was at the other place, right? And Mike was a big fan of this event and a big fan. Mike loved Pennsylvania. Mike's birth mother was from Newcastle, Pennsylvania. But yeah, and Mike Reagan would have said, his father certainly said, that the moral core is at the core of conservatism.
How about today on the campus? There is a there is a difference between the conservative movement, which is the topic of discussion and the connecting tissue for most of the people in this room, and the MAGA movement. And there are a lot of overlap between the two, but distinctions can be made. I'm curious, on the campus today, and even though you're on one of the more conservative campuses nationwide, is the MAGA movement, as distinct from the conservative movement, a strong and viable movement? And if so, what distinguishes it?
Well, Grove City College is definitely an anomaly. We had over
For which
80%.
we're grateful, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. In fact, I keep on my office desk a survey in the Collegian, our campus newspaper, which showed that 80% of our students were voting for Trump and 8% for Kamala. So 80 to 8, right? You're not going to see that at any other college in America. Right? Pretty astonishing. But I'm glad you brought
those 80% are made up of people who might self-define as conservative and others who might self-define as MAGA. So it's that distinction that I'm curious about from your perspective.
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, a lot of them were voting for Trump to vote against Kamala, right? So it's a good question as to how many. At Grove City College, though, they're conservative, right? They tend to be conservative. And one of the points that I was going to bring up today in this panel is that among the good news that's out there is that young people are really trending conservative. Yeah. It's quite remarkable, especially young men. With young women, I mean, they're the ones that elected Mamdani in New York, right? There's going to be a marriage problem here at some point, right, between young guys and young girls. But and also related to this, we saw articles even last week in the New York Times. There's a big movement into Christianity among young people,
including Orthodox Christianity.
Exactly, right. a surge that was completely unexpected. But young people today, especially now 2026 in college today, they were raised under COVID masking. They were raised under cancel culture, all the wokeism and transgender stuff in sports. And they are now, I think this generation of 18 to 25-year-olds, 18 to 30-year-olds, is more conservative than any generation that I've seen, probably going back to my time at that period in the Reagan 1980s.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm now going to pivot off of that, give you a break, and have you come third on this one. But the question is, if you're correct in identifying that cadre of young people who are trending conservative, who will lead them? What do you think?
In terms of a national candidate and all that sort of thing, well, I think that J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are both well positioned for this. I was somewhat interested that a while back, President Trump was giving an interview on Air Force One, and somehow the topic came up, and he blended it together as the next ticket of J.D. for president and Marco for vice president. Whether that comes to pass or not, we shall see.
I would frankly prefer it in the opposite order, but not everyone would agree.
Well, you know, vice presidents have whomever they are, have an upper leg or an upper hand rather on this, and that's why I suspect JD would probably get the nod. But vice presidents spend their time. This was something that Richard Nixon excelled at, running around America giving speeches to local Republican groups, so that by the time you got to the convention, the delegates were all sewn up because they'd all had a chance to see Richard Nixon in person. And I imagine JD is doing some version of that.
And Marco Rubio is going around the world representing us, I think, in a very noble and positive way at a time of tremendous conflict where real subtlety is required, and he is providing it without compromise. I mean, it's fascinating to watch him.
Yeah. Yes. I noticed the current issue of Newsmax. I think the question at the bottom on the front page is what's next for Marco Rubio. And, by the time you get to be Secretary of State, there's not much left.
Well, there's a little bit. John, who do you think will lead them?
Well, the historian David Pietruska has a saying, All things being equal, they never are. And of course, that great philosopher Casey Stengel used to say, never make predictions, especially about the future. The fact is,
It just never ends. You just have a complete well of these witticisms, aphorisms. I love it. I love it.
Colin, the truth is that one never knows what will happen in politics.
That's right.
I certainly don't like to dwell on the past, but 1973, all of the people who were in the conservative then movement were totally committed to the then Vice President Spiro Agnew for president. In fact, a fellow I'm going to help bury this afternoon, David Keene, worked for the Vice President,
yes.
and that was his primary job,
That's how he got
to
started.
lay the groundwork for 1976. But then some legal troubles came up, and on October 10th, 1973, Agnew was an ex-vice president. And Ronald Reagan was suddenly thrust back into the future of national politics. So these things are unpredictable in the future. Let's say Vivek Ramaswamy is elected governor of Ohio. You all remember Vivek, he came here a few years ago to speak. I would not be surprised if he is thrust back into presidential politics 2 years after that. Rand Paul, who's got some problems in his home state, problems with the president. Boy, he has a lot of problems. But he still talks about going up or out, leaving the Senate and making another run for president. The Republican Party and the conservative movement have a bumper crop of candidates. And just based on my past experience of being wrong about these things, I would not bet the farm on Rubio and or Vice President Vance at this point. Maybe a few acres, but not the farm.
Yeah. By the way, Rand Paul will be our commencement speaker at Grove City College.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. For me, I thought it's going to be Vance and Rubio. I think will be the ticket. The question, indeed, Colin, who's at the top of the ticket? I mean, it makes sense that Vance, being the VP, would be at the top of the ticket, and Rubio, I think, would be thrilled to be vice president, right? And Rubio's still young enough. I think he's probably in his early 50s. I don't think it's
52,
even 52. So he has plenty of time. He's been outstanding as Secretary of State. I think Rubio's more generally popular than Vance. In fact, as President Trump pointed out in the State of the Union speech, he was approved unanimously for that position by the Senate. I mean, that was it 99-0, I think, maybe, John?
Something like that.
He didn't get a single no vote at all in being approved for Secretary of State, which is astonishing.
Yes.
So he has,
some of that
he has general
senatorial
support.
courtesy. Senatorial courtesy. Some of that.
Tell that to Mark
Well,
Wayne
that's
Mullen.
right.
And at least,
Tell that to
very
him.
good point. Absolutely. John mentioned a bumper crop in addition to Rubio and Vance. My next question is our new Senator, Dave McCormick, in that bumper crop? What's your impression of him as a future national leader?
I mean, for me, it's too early to say. John Fetterman's getting probably more headlines, right? Interestingly, which is nothing against McCormick. It's not a slight against McCormick at all.
But that's because Fetterman is, in more than one ways, an oddity.
Right, that's right. That's correct. And that's really what I mean by that. Yeah. In fact, if you check Breitbart every day, I think they're obsessed with Fetterman. I think Fox News is too. He's there all the time. But I think with McCormick, it's just too early to say. But some of the people that John mentioned, Vivek Ramaswamy, especially indeed if he gets elected governor of Ohio, Rand Paul will be around. A lot of those people from that original group in 2015, 2016 are still around, although not Chris Christie, he's gone. Jeb Bush, done, right? But Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, and now add J.D. Vance to it. I think almost without question, and really 2027 is next year, right? I mean, it's got, at this point, you'd put the money on a Vance Rubio ticket of some sort, depending on who's.
One of the things that happens in midterm elections is that there is a bumper crop of people we never heard of before who suddenly are getting all the headlines because they've been elected governor or senator from their state or sometimes even the House. I think back to 1966 when I was just a child and following politics, and the 66 elections came along, and yes, California did vote for a movie actor to be governor, and there was an oilman down in Texas named George H.W. Bush who got himself elected to Congress and hence on the road to the rest of that quite remarkable career. So that kind of thing can, in fact, happen, that there are people we're not even thinking of at the moment who will appear on stage after this election. So we will see.
Has anyone else caught your eye as someone with some kind of special gift in connecting to people that maybe hasn't risen to national prominence, but has somehow struck a chord with any of you?
I think Vivek is really a rising star, as it were, and I think that would be quite interesting. Let's see.
I mean, a lot of them are going into podcasting.
Right.
We had Robert Ryder and Olivia Magala, and some of us were talking last night. We brought Nick Freitas to Grove City College a few weeks ago, and he was just a huge hit. And he left the Virginia legislature, and he notes how now he has more influence as a podcaster than he did in the Virginia legislature. So a lot of the people that are shaping the movement today are not even in politics. So think of somebody like Rush Limbaugh, right? The influence that Rush had, never going into politics, but going into talk radio. Yeah.
Since you mentioned Virginia, one name I didn't mention, but he continually pops up, former Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia.
Right.
Yeah.
He's outstanding.
He is outstanding, and I would just say Virginia will soon have a initiative, thank you, on a Democratic gerrymandering plan, which would reduce the ranks of Republican House members from the Old Dominion to one. And it would be interesting to see if Governor Youngkin raises money for that, campaigns to defeat it, and emerges again. Or he could emerge in a cabinet position sooner or later. But he's someone who clearly wants to do something beyond being governor of Virginia.
And I think late 50s. His
Yes.
age. Right.
How about the evolving nature of media and its interplay with politics? You were mentioning a podcast. You've got a podcast of your own. John is now with Newsmax. It didn't exist a number of years ago. Jeff has had a distinguished broadcast journalism background. Tell us how you think the evolving nature of media either drives or reflects the evolving nature of the political scene.
I really think that's a very big deal. In most of our lifetimes, there were 3 television networks, and then you had, the New York Times and the Washington Post, et cetera. Well, now you have what we have come to call, quote unquote, social media. And it always amuses me that some teenage kid can be sitting in his parents' basement and put together a video on, let's say, the Iran war and what's going on, hit the button, and it goes all over the country and the world. And that is a huge change in the way the media exists.
It's inherently short form media too. So the
attention spans.
well, but that has a profound impact on our politics. And if media and our politics become increasingly reduced to sound bites and simplistic asides rather than thoughtful analysis, what does that do to the integrity of our political system?
Wow. I think it does have a real impact on it. Just the way our society has sort of transformed itself over the decades and the technology, we really do have short spans, attention spans here.
Newsmax has done a good job of maintaining long-form journalism as well as meeting
Yes.
some of the short attention span needs. John, tell me what it's like to be at the center of Newsmax as a growing media force.
Well, I'll speak personally about that, Colin. At my mature age, I have achieved a dream that goes back to my very young years, which is to have an opportunity to work in journalism at all different levels. Our magazine that you mentioned, my online column, from which I gather a lot of information on Pennsylvania when I'm at PLC, Newsmax TV as well, and this leads in turn to spots on radio, many radio programs that I met the hosts thereof at the PLC have had me on as a guest since then. So through Newsmax, I have been able to be exposed and to work in all areas of the modern media, and I love it.
You know, the rise of Newsmax is really impressive. And Chris Ruddy and I both go back to the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, where we met in the 1990s.
Which just closed, sadly.
That's right. Yeah. And I still write for the Trib. I have a column every other week for the Trib. And Dick Scaife loved Chris Ruddy, supported him early on. And Newsmax, first of all, it was a publication at first, and it's still in print. Very large print circulation. I just did a book, a new biography of Pope Leo through Humanix Books, which is now a publishing arm of Newsmax and Chris Ruddy. And I did a bunch of shows through the Newsmax network. I had no idea, and maybe some of you don't. You would, John, but Newsmax is not just in New York with one station. I mean, it's got stations in Florida. It's got a Newsmax 1, a Newsmax 2, a Newsmax 3. So it's really expanding in ways I don't think people realize, and is growing probably faster than Fox did. But the beauty of this is that, like Jeff said, I'll go back to the 1980s again. The news media was ABC, CBS, NBC, right? Peter Jennings, Dan Rather, boo, right? Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw. And then you had CNN came along, and there was nothing else. Then talk radio came. Conservatives got in through that, and then Fox News. But now, I mean, it's astonishing, and kudos to Donald Trump on this. We at the American Spectator actually have a White House correspondent who's now part of the press pool in the Trump White House. And at one point in time, I mean, for the rest of the media, the news media, they're like, how can you possibly do that? I mean, the press pool should be the New York Times and the AP or the Washington Post, CNN and nobody else. But that's all completely blown up.
One particularly significant aspect of social media in the political sphere is that the way the politics used to connect with the voters was through media. Now it can be a direct connection. You're getting podcasts, you're getting tweets, you're getting Truth Social posts from the President of the United States in a virtual blizzard.
Right.
And that never existed before.
And people get their news directly through Truth Social. They don't have to get it through what George W. Bush always called the filter.
Right. Well, it was a filter.
It was a filter.
And it filtered left.
And now you can click the link, if there's even a link in an article that you're reading, and it'll go straight to Truth Social. It's like, wait, there's the full quote. They left out half of this. Right? The second half is really important. So now people just get it directly through that, and the liberal media can complain all they want, but this is a good development. They no longer control the narrative and control all the information, and they hate it.
I remember having a conversation with Donald Trump before, this is back in 2013, and he was going on at length about what he was calling fake news.
Yeah, right.
A term which I had not heard, and now which is quite commonplace. But he was, and I think being a New Yorker, and he really was very attuned to how the media operates, and would get all these headlines in the tabloids, and I think he loved them. My favorite was the New York Post. And the front page, it says, Donald's girl, colon, best sex I ever had. I thought, wow, there's something most presidential candidates would not be going in that direction. But
well, it's to the point where Donald Trump almost himself controls the news media, right? And in fact, frankly, I hate it. It's getting tiresome, right? But he really controls the entire narrative almost with his Truth Social account. And every day he's putting up multiple posts, which he's like unilaterally driving the news cycle sometimes. And the whole world's reacting to him.
Because he doesn't go through the filter.
That's right.
I mean, that is profound, the impact of that.
It is.
And
Ronald Reagan in the 1980s would say, well, the beauty of giving these speeches, these evening speeches, is I can go right around the media directly to the American people. But he could only do that a couple times a year. Right. Trump now can do that a couple times every hour.
That's
a couple times every half
minute.
Hour. Right. A couple times every 10 minutes. Right. At 3 a.m.
Right. But there's something essentially direct and honest and plain and correct about that, to be able to reach your constituents without the filter, without the bending, without the fake news. Now, it has to be used responsibly, and it can be overused and all of that, and I think we're sort of watching people grope their way through that. But the basic concept of media has changed, and it no longer is the medium through which individual office holders and hopefuls and so on connect with their constituents.
And I'd say a danger of it too is the instantaneous nature, right? Where, like,
you mean thoughtless nature of it?
The Truth Social post that I read at 8:03 a.m. on Easter Sunday morning.
Yes.
Right, that made me say, "Oh man."
Yes.
Couldn't somebody have edited that?
Right.
Please, it's Easter Sunday.
You're right. Every once in a while, there's a desire to bring back the filter.
Right. An editor, please. Right. Yeah. But I mean, they're like letters that are instantly posted online. And the days of the American founders, before Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr wrote to each other, at least they wrote their letter and it sat there on their table overnight, and then they could think about it the next morning before the postal guy picked it up. And now you just write it and type it, and it's like a cruise missile.
I love that. It's very much like a cruise missile.
Right.
Every once in a while, the guidance system goes awry.
That's right.
For sure.
That's right. But the thing about that is it does go awry, but there's always something coming along right behind it that wipes it from the headlines.
Let's shift our focus to a particular issue that is, I think, at the front of everyone's mind, but it hasn't come up a lot here at the PLC this year, and that is this whole matter of the Iran war and the strategy behind it, and where you think it goes from here. Is, for instance, just to get it started, I'll throw this question out. Is this current ceasefire worth protecting and extending, or is there something about this ceasefire which actually frustrates the accomplishment of goals that need to be accomplished?
I mean, I could go ahead.
I'll tell you something. I think it's unanimous that I speak first here. So I must say that President Trump is very much aware of the fact that he cannot have a U.S. presence in Iran and in that part of the world for a protracted length of time. In my presence, he has talked about his contempt for the layover in Iraq by the U.S. presence, by the attempt to micromanage its transition to a new form of government, nation building, if you will. That will not happen in Iran. I think that what he would like, well, I believe what he would have liked in a perfect world were for the protests to overthrow the regime.
Right. Absolutely.
Which would not have required assistance from the United States. And talking to the diaspora community in the United States and others with contacts in Tehran and throughout the country, they were very successful. I had one Iranian in the U.S. talk about how his contacts in Iran actually would seize police stations and Revolutionary Guard Corps offices, overpower the guards there, get the guns. 2 nights before the bombing began, February 27th, and this did not receive much attention at all, 250 of the protesters, armed, stormed the Ayatollah's compound and fired on the Revolutionary Guards. 100 were killed, some captured, I believe later executed. But the fact was, they launched an attack and were armed at the time. This was going to go on, and I think this is the president's desire. After the bombing, people in Iran had a demonstration that I covered in a march in Washington, and they had signs, "Thank you, President Trump, for killing Khamenei." And they said the protests were doing well, but they just needed a little bit of a help to win. So I do believe in the end there will be some kind of a stopgap government, as there is in Venezuela now, but it will be no means permanent. And the people on the ground who bled and fought and died will eventually write the new constitution for a free Iran without U.S. interference. How long this takes, when they can be turned over to their own cognizance to do this, remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, we took out the Ayatollah and we thought it would unravel right away after that. Like, the Tsar abdicating in Russia, right? Everything would fall apart after that. But instead, I guess his son took over, if he's alive. It's hard to say who's in charge, right? Which imam is in charge. There's the hidden imam in Shiite Islam, right? There's kind of like a hidden imam in Iran right now. I don't know who exactly. We don't even know who's in charge. When President Trump issued that statement on Truth Social on Tuesday morning about an entire civilization will end tonight, I don't want to see that happen, but it probably will. One concern I had with that was, who are you sending this to? Who's in charge, right? Who's in charge? And I think he figured that was a threat that he wouldn't have to follow through on. And about an hour before the 8 o'clock deadline, he said, we have a deal. Well, then the next morning, the Iranians were breaking the deal, right? So I don't even know who's in charge. We have the son of the Shah, who's in the United States, right? But yeah, I don't know what support he has or if he could come back. So part of the problem with, President Trump was critical of this with President Bush in Iraq in the early 2000s. You don't really want to do regime change. You don't really want to get involved, but that's probably what we're going to have to do at this point. But I don't know who's set to take over.
What about the demonstrated lack of support from the American populace as reflected in polling? I don't mean to interrupt you, John, but I want to throw that factor in there too.
Well, I just checked the numbers on stage before I came out. So as of this morning at Real Clear Politics, President Trump's approval is 41%. Disapproval is 57%. And that's the composite polling of all polls out there. So that's really low. So he's in serious jeopardy of going below 40 for the first time in quite a while. So this is not popular. And if it gets worse, those numbers are going to get a lot worse. And we're really going to see that in the midterm election.
Regime change never seems to work well for American governments.
Right.
And I think back to when we were much younger and it was Vietnam and what was his name? No Jin Din.
No Din Diem.
Jim. Yeah, I mean, they had real problems over there and assassinations and all of that kind of thing. And it just doesn't. And it's not, if you're an American president, it's not really worth it
That was Kennedy.
to get involved in all of this kind of thing. And
In Iraq.
Especially in the Middle East.
Yeah. One other postscript to this. I mentioned last night that I was in Japan a week ago and talking to leaders in the government. They would very much look forward to being the conduit or the back channel with Iran because they have a relationship with Iran. They have recognized its government for 47 years. Their foreign minister, Mr. Motegi, has a great relationship with the Iranian foreign minister, who was a former ambassador to Japan. Keep your eye on him, and I'm not sure I can pronounce his name right. I don't want to create an international incident, but he could emerge as the governing figure in Iran. Now, personally, having covered the Cuban Americans for years, and now dealing with opponents of Vladimir Putin in the U.S., I don't trust the exile or diaspora community that much because they've been away so long that one questions how they could govern. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, has not lived there in a half century, nor has Mrs. Rajavi, the president of the Iran Revolutionary Council, which is the largest group. She's based in Paris. I've had a couple of good interviews with her online. I've been to her office in the United States. Again, capable person with a following, with money behind her. But the leader will almost certainly come from the ground.
All right, we have less than 3 minutes left. Let's each take 1 minute and answer the question, where do we go from here as a movement?
Well, I guess I'll go first. By the way, I have copies of the American Spectator for free.
Oh, good.
Yeah, out at our Institute for Faith and Freedom booth. Make sure you get a copy.
Yeah.
I'll circle back to what I said. A positive development for the state of the conservative movement, the topic of this panel, is young people trending to conservatism. And that, I hope, will be a long-term trend, and that's going to bode well for beyond 2028, and hopefully with Congress beyond the midterm and everything too. And right now with Donald Trump, the question is how well this term goes, because you don't want to see your leading guy, J.D. Vance, in 2028 get so damaged from this that he ends up losing, right? So that's got to keep your eye on that ball.
Okay, could happen. John?
I think Congress is the place to watch right now in terms of what happens with the rest of the Trump agenda on domestic policy, in terms of the budget in the future. What is the successor to Big Beautiful Bill? Grover Norquist, who's been a guest here, has said there's more Big Beautiful Bills in the work that will include things we've talked about for a while, like finally killing the death tax, the estate tax.
Beautiful.
And not letting go of some key conservative gems that just haven't seen the light in Congress. So I think watching who leads in Congress and what he or she does with President Trump's domestic agenda will be a very key to sculpting the future of the conservative movement.
And that agenda is going to be hard to accomplish if there's a loss of majority in the House.
right.
Exactly.
Right.
I would add that the states have the potential to contribute a great deal to the rise of the conservative movement. That we will have. I mean, there are people out there that we have yet to hear their name, and they're running for the state legislature or maybe governor or what have you in their state. And this is the way. I mean, nobody thought in 1960 when Richard Nixon lost that the rising star on the horizon was a movie actor from California.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I remember reading a front page article. I went back and looked at this again. A front page article in the New York Times in 1965 that the California Republican establishment was panicked because Ronald Reagan was making an inclination that making it clear that he was thinking of running for governor, and they thought, "Oh my God, we can't do that."
What a hopeful note on which to end. Let's express our appreciation to Jeff, John, and Paul. Thank you all.